Hi everyone, in this tutorial we're going to create these great SVG scroll transform animations by taking advantage of Adobe Illustrator's generative vector and Framer's component variable and variant features. I'll leave a link in the description below for the remix link so you can check and practice as you like. So let's see the creation process of these great scroll transforms. So we're gonna start by creating a frame inside of our desktop stack and name it headline. Then I'm going to change its background to white from my color styles, and I'm gonna make its background opacity 4%, and I'm gonna make its bottom right and left radiuses 32 pixels. After selecting the text tool, I'm going to paste the text choose your adventure inside of the headline frame, and while my text element is selected, I'm going to make its text style heading 4 from my styles. Then I'm going to select the headline frame and clicking the plus button next to layout on the right sidebar. I'm gonna turn it into a stack, and then I'm gonna start changing its stack properties. So I'm gonna make it both width and height fit content, and I'm going to change its gap to 16 pixels. Enter some padding values. For top 40, right is going to be 76, bottom is going to be 28, and left is going to be 76 pixels. Now we can create our down arrow icon, right? To include our icon, I'm going to press the insert button at top left and in the search box type material. Then I'm going to drag the Google material component to the headline stack, and in the material component properties, I'm going to change its color to white and make the icon keyword arrow down. Then I'm going to lock its aspect ratio and make its width 36 pixels, and I'm going to duplicate the icon that I've just created, and selecting them both, I'm going to wrap them into a frame which is going to be named down arrow, and selecting the icon at top, I'm going to make its opacity 0.25. And I'm going to select the icon at the bottom and pin it to the top. I'm going to change its top spacing to 17. Before turning our down arrow frame into a component, I'm going to adjust its height and make it 50. Now we can turn it into a component, leaving the name as it is. And while I'm in the down arrow component screen, I'm going to click the plus button next to first variant to create a new variant. And in this new variant, I'm going to flip the opacities of the icons, making the first one's opacity 1 and second one's 0.25. And now we can set the interaction, right? I'm going to drag a connection from the first variant to the second, and the trigger is going to be appear, and delay is going to be 1.2 seconds. And since we need this animation to be a loop, I'm going to click the input box next to appear and make the transition cycle. And under the styles section, I'm gonna click spring next to transition, and clicking the ease tab, I'm going to change the time value to 0.7 to define the duration of the animation. Now we can go back to home screen and test our down arrow animation, right? As you see, it works. Let's start creating the static elements of the categories using vector visuals generated in Adobe Illustrator and copy created in ChatGPT. For the first category, I'll create a text element that says Mountain Magic right below the top section, and of course I need to change its text style to titled. Then I'll duplicate the title text that I've just created and select them both, and right clicking, I'm going to select add frame from the menu, and I'm gonna name the frame titled, and then I'm going to change its width of fill and height to 77 pixels to align them on top of each other. Since we created the bottom clone to apply a white stroke without distorting the text and its font weight, we're going to apply the large stroke to the clone at the bottom. In order to apply a stroke to the clone at the bottom. I'm going to detach it from its text style by clicking the X next to styles, and I'm going to click the plus button next to text and add a stroke property. And in the stroke pop-up, I'm going to click the color box and select blue from my styles. Then I'll go back to stroke pop-up and I'll give it a 10 pixels of stroke. And now we need to select the title frame and make its overflow visible to make all the stroke visible, right? And lastly, I'll make its position sticky. Time to import our SVG visuals, right? You can see the vectors that I previously generated using generative vector feature in Adobe Illustrator. How I did was basically, let me just select one of the previous generations and copy the prompt. And first, actually, you need to select a rectangle to determine the size of the generation you want. And as you see, the prompt I copied is already in the generative taskbar's prompt section. So I'm gonna just click to generate or hit return, and Illustrator is going to generate 3 alternatives, and you can review and pick one of them. Let's say we picked this one. I already exported the SVGs that I'm going to use, but to demonstrate. And the good thing about this generation technique is we can have vectors with matching styles for each set. So every foreground and background pairs have styles that match, because after selecting the rectangle tool, you can just draw a rectangle over one of your previous generations. And let's actually copy the prompt for the foreground generation for this set and click in the generate vectors. I'm going to paste the prompt to colorful camping tents without any background. So I'm gonna hit generate. Again, I can see the alternatives that are generated and totally select one of them. And good thing about this, I can freely move separate generations, resize and place them as I like. Then all I need to do is just select in the asset that I want to export. Since I need both SVGs to be separate elements to be able to animate them separately, I'm going to right click and select export selection from the menu. That way I can export SVGs separately and animate them. And now we can create the frames to import our SVGs, right? Of course we can use PNGs as well, but SVGs have smaller file size, and since they are vectors, they don't get distorted when we increase their sizes while we animate. I'll select the frame tool and change its size to the background size that I determined before, 733 for width and 318 for height, and I'll name it B for background. Now we can import our SVG in this frame, right? So I'm gonna click the input box next to fill and click the image tab, then click in choose image. I'm going to import set 1, and after my SVG has been uploaded, I'm going to change its type to fit. Of course, in a real world project, we need to remember to enter alt text to keep our design more accessible, right? Before creating another frame for our foreground element, we need to change the desktop breakpoints height to fit content to keep it flexible. Then I can create another frame and name it F for foreground. Of course, I need to make sure that it's in the desktop stack, right? Then I can import my SVG for foreground element. So again, selecting the image, click and choose image. I'm going to import the record asset and again change it to fit. Now I can resize the F frame to the size that I determined before. So its width is going to be 407 and height is going to be 141. Now we can wrap our background and foreground elements in a frame, which is going to be called visual. Then I'll change visual frame's position to sticky and keeping its width as it is. I'm going to make its height 295. Now we can position and resize our foreground elements in any way we want, right? Of course, we need to make sure it stays in the visual frame. Then I'll make the visual frames overflow visible. And now we can select our title and visual frames and wrap them in a stack that is going to be called category. And then I'm going to set also overflow of the category stack to visible, since in order sticky position to work, every parent element needs to have their overflow set to visible, and they need to be a stack. And then I'm going to make its gap 0 and enter some padding values to adjust spacing. So top padding is going to be 42 and bottom is going to be 50, and I'll keep the other ones 0. Then I'm going to select background frame and make its position -40. Of course, I need to increase the title's z-index to keep it in front, right? Now we can create the activity list items. So I'm going to insert the Google material component, and I'm going to lock the icon's aspect ratio and enter 24 for width. Then I'm going to double click the icon to quickly view its component properties. I'm going to change its color to green from my color styles, and then paste the icon name under search and keep its style to rounded. Now we can create the text element for our first list item, right? So after selecting the text tool, I'm going to paste the first list item and I'm going to drag it under the icon. Now it's time to create the stack for our list elements. So I'm going to select both icon and text element for our list, and selecting the add stack, I'm going to paste the title icon and list item. Then I'm going to change its width and height to fit content. As I see it, height is already set to fit content. Then I'm going to make the direction horizontal under layout and make its gap 12 pixels. Since we need 3 list items for each category, I'm going to duplicate the list item twice. Then I'll select all 3 of them and right-clicking, I'm going to wrap them into a stack. Name the stack list, and I need to make the list stacks with property fit content and change its gap to 24 pixels. Now we can paste the actual content that we've created with ChatGPT for the second and third list items, right? So I will do that both for second and third one. Of course, we need our list items to be aligned to left, right? I'll change it under the list stack layout properties, and I'm going to add 64 pixels of top and bottom padding for our list. For our button element, first I'll create the text and I'll drag it into our category element, and I'm gonna right click and add a stack and I'll name it button. Of course, I need to change the text of my buttons style to button from my text styles. Now we can change our button stacks properties, right? So it's both width and height needs to be fit. I'm gonna add some padding values. The top is going to be 16, right? Bottom are also going to be 16. Only left is going to be 32. Lastly, I'll change its fill to blue from my color styles and enter 99 for the radius to make it perfectly rounded. I know the padding looks off a little bit, but since we're going to add an icon also, it's going to be perfectly spaced afterwards. Time to add the icon to our button, right? Now I'm going to drag the material component right after the select text. Then I'll make its width and height 30. I'm not locking its aspect ratio because for some reason when I lock, the height changes, so I need both width and height to be 30 pixels. And of course I need to change the icon and its color, right? So after double clicking the material icon to view its properties quickly, I'm going to click the icon name while I'm under the list tab, and I'm going to type keyboard and select keyboard arrow right icon. Of course I need to make its color white. Actually, since the space between the text and icon looks a little much to me, I'm going to make the gap of the button stack 0. Looks like we have everything to turn our button stack to a component, right? So I'm going to right click, select create component and leave its name as it is. Now we can add a hover state to our button, right? So I'll do that and change the hover state's background color to dark blue. Let's go to home screen, and to be able to add some button and top spacing to our button element, we need to wrap it in a stack, and to be descriptive, I'll name it button wrap. Then I'm going to add 40 pixels of top and bottom padding to it. Before turning our category stack into a component, we need to add a subtle background gradient to create a nice transition between the categories, right? So after selecting the category stack, I'm going to click the input box next to fill under styles. Now select the gradient tab, and the last gradient we have here, just 4% of color opacity to transparency, is going to serve perfect for that purpose. Now that we have everything we need for our category component, we can create it, right? So I'm gonna right click the category stack and select create component. We're gonna combine component variants and variables to create the optimal and flexible component structure for our categories. We're gonna create new variants for background and foreground visuals, since assigning variables for the images can be limiting in terms of placement and size. We need to be able to manually adjust spacing and size of the background and foreground images depending on the composition we want to create. That's only possible with variants, and considering we're going to have only a few categories, that's the optimal solution. But we can use variables for category titles, list items, and if we were using this for a real site, we'd use also for button links, right? So we're gonna do that. I'll select the top mountain magic layer under the title frame and click the content under the text. Hovering over create variable, I'm going to select plain text and create a text variable. I'm going to leave its name as title and default value as mountain magic. Then I'll close the pop-up, and to assign the same variable to the text layer at the bottom, or the one we created, to apply the large stroke comfortably, again I'm going to click the content label under text, and hovering over category component, I'm going to assign its content to the title variable that we've just created. That way we're gonna be able to change both layers content with a single variable added in the component properties. Since we're going to use 3 list items for each variant, we can create 3 separate text variables for them, right? So I'll select the text in the first list item and click in the content label under the text section, and hovering over create variable, I'm going to select formatted text this time to be a little more flexible, since user might want to enter some links or format the text a little more, etc. And I'm gonna enter as name list item 1. Following the same steps, I'm gonna create format text variables for other 2 list items, naming them list item 2 and list item 3. Now we can create other variants for our category component, right? So while the variant 1 is selected, I'm gonna click the plus variant button next to it, and in the new variant I'm gonna select the background frame, and under the style section I'm going to click the image next to fill, clicking the choose image button in the pop-up. I'm going to select asset2.svg. Then I can repeat the process to change the foreground elements, right? Asset2 2, and once it has been uploaded, I can just resize and nudge, of course making sure that I'm staying under the visual frame. So I can make it slightly bigger, etc. And I'll repeat the process for the third variant. Select on the background frame, click in the image, choosing the relevant SVG, and for the foreground as well. And now we can start creating our scroll animations, starting with the title frame. So I'll make the animation settings all in the primary variant, because that way they are going to be inherited by the other variants, right? After selecting the title frame, I'm gonna click the plus button next to effects, and I'm going to select scroll transform. And since we need that transform to be triggered by the next section when user scrolls in the page, I'm going to select section and view as trigger, and viewport can stay as bottom because we want animation transformation to start when the next section is at the bottom of the viewport. Since following scroll section is going to be different for each category, I'm going to assign this section to a variable. Click in the create variable. I'm going to paste the title following scroll section, and since we need our title's initial state needs to be its its non-transformed or non-deformed state, I'm going to make it both opacity and scale 1 in the from state, and under 2 I'm going to change them both to 0, and also I'm going to make Y offset for the title 40. We can go back to home screen to test the title animations, right? So I'm gonna duplicate the category component twice and change each category to its relevant variant, and define their scroll sections, clicking the plus button next to it. So for the first one, I'm going to just type 1, keep things simple. Second one's scroll section is going to be 2, so on. We can also enter values for following scroll sections, right? Now that we've defined the scroll section for each variant. So second one is of course following the first one, and third one is going to be the following section of the second one, and fourth one we're going to create a sample following section to be able to see the animations in the third variant. Since the first component variant has its content by default, I'm going to make the required copy and content changes for the other two variants. So the second one's title is going to be Beach Retreat, and I will also enter the list items that I've generated with ChatGPT. So the list item 1, and I'll paste list item 2 and 3. I'll make these changes also for the third variant. As I mentioned before, in order to be able to see the scroll transforms for the third variant, we need to create a sample following section after it. So I'm gonna duplicate the third variant. I'm going to right click and select detach instance to make it a static or non-component element, and then I'll delete all the content it has. Then I'm going to change its height to fixed and change its padding to 0, and as scroll section I'm going to enter 4. Now it's going to be better if we create a sample text for this sample section, right? So after selecting the text tool, I'm going to create a text element that says sample section and change its text style to sample text. And now we can pick following scroll section for the third variant, which is going to be 4, of course. And I guess we can test our title animations, right? As you see, maybe perfectly. Now we can apply scroll transform to our background elements, right? After going to category components screen in the primary variant, I'm going to select the background element, and I'm gonna click the plus button next to effects. I'm going to select scroll transform section in view, and for the section I'm going to select again following scroll section variant. That way we're gonna be able to find the following scroll section once and use it for every element whenever we need, right? So again, we need its both opacity and scaled to be 1, and its to state needs to be 0 for both. Let's go back to home screen and see how our background transforms are doing. Yeah, they work. Since we have another z-index issue for our list and button elements, we need to make their z-indexes bigger than the visuals, right? So first I'm going to select the list stack, and under the styles I'm going to add a z-index property, and I'll enter something like 5. And selecting button wrap, since we need button to be in front of all of the other elements we have, I'm going to enter something like 8. So let's go back to home screen. And as you see, our select button and text is in front of the other ones. Now it's time to add animations for or scroll transforms for our foreground elements, right? Again, effects, scroll transform, after selecting it, section in view, following scroll section, from 1 for opacity and scaled, to 0 opacity, and as user scrolls to the following section, I need a foreground element to get bigger. For an interesting animation, I'll make a scale 2. So let's go back to home screen, test it. I think it looks great. Now we can animate our also list items, right? After selecting the list stack in the variant 1, I'm going to, again, effects, scroll transform, section and view, following scroll section from its default size and opacity to 0 opacity and scale. So let's see how that looks. As we scroll, our list items get smaller. Now we can also animate our select buttons, right? After selecting the button component in the component screen, I'm going to, again, effect, scroll transform, section and view, following scroll section from its default size and opacity. I want our button to get a little bigger when user scrolls. So I'm going to enter for scale 1.4 under 2 state. So let's go back and see how that looks. As you see, it completes our scroll animation in a great way, since select is the interaction element in this design. We keep it on top and we even make it slightly bigger as user scrolls. So this wraps up our tutorial. Hope you liked it. Don't forget to subscribe and turn the notifications on if you haven't already. And also don't forget to check my other videos at the end screen. So see you in the next one.